AI and autonomous agents are wreaking havoc with cybersecurity. Rob T. Lee is Chief AI Officer of the SANS Institute, and our co host today is David Bray, Chair of the Accelerator at the Stimson Center. Rob, why should we care about the AI lifecycle and security? Like, why does this even matter?
Oh, geez. You're untapping a massive problem when we end up starting to talk about the speed and the velocity that's able to be achieved with autonomous agents. You look back just 4 or 5 months ago, and and Claude Code being utilized and detected by Anthropic, basically automating offensive capabilities in the attack inside organizations with minimal human in the loop to be able to make sure that hallucinations are minimized. Things that used to take months, weeks are now being accomplished in minutes and seconds. And it's hard to wrap your head around about what that specifically means for potentially detection, being able to stop it, and be able to see what's going to happen even 6 months after the fact, what the adversaries and capabilities of even an individual possibility of accomplishing inside a network, much less attacking an individual for scams.
David, sounds pretty scary.
It does. At the same time, this is, I think, every decade something new shows up on the scene, and this is what, the challenge of our decade is, exactly as Rob said, is the speed and scale of which generative AI is able to allow an attacker that might not be that sophisticated, or possibly what would take a long lead time. They can piece together an attack and do the reconnaissance and actually execute the attack, is unprecedented. But it means we need to adapt, and it means we need to, in some respects, find strategies that allow us to identify what we would call abnormal patterns of life happening in enterprises and adapting and responding faster. So I look at it as a sort of response of the attacker has evolved their strategies. It's time for the defenders to do the same.
Rob, how have AI and autonomous agents changed the nature of threats, changed the nature of attacks? And as David was talking, I saw you kind of nodding your head in agreement.
Well, here's the thing. Everything. I'm a big history buff, and you go back, and it doesn't even take that long. Every single time there's a massive technological change, there's a massive change in tactics that need to follow it, and much less the strategy. You could go back to the introduction of the airplane, World War One, the tank, especially back then. Going back to the Civil War, the line defense with Napoleonic, what we ended up seeing then, all the way up to the aircraft carrier. I I basically moved this mindset into warfare, into what's going on, cyber defense, cyber offense as a whole. As a result of the speed, velocity, you end up taking a look at, essentially the Blitzkrieg, what happened in World War II. The same kind of mentality has occurred. Things that used to be planned out that would take weeks, months for an offensive campaign were now shortened to days. This type of mentality really created a shock and awe to individuals trying to defend against it. That type of shock and awe is going to force a strategic and tactical redefinition of the way that we're applying cyber defense currently. How fast can we ingest and leverage in threat intelligence the tools, tactics, and techniques that the adversaries are using, and be able to leverage the capabilities that we have in front of us? AI changes not only the offensive capabilities, but the defensive ones. The hard part, though, is being able to leverage these defensive ones in ways that are legal, able to reduce regulatory, potential violations. But if you imagine this, for example, if multiple different organizations get hit simultaneously, if they're ingesting those automated detected TTPs into it and then spread it out worldwide, we'd be able to have a chance to counter what the offensive teams are doing at the same velocity that they're accomplishing it. But right now, like, even if you start, saying how would that be accomplished, we have a hard time just sharing threat intelligence, handing pieces of paper over, or even calling each other on the phone, much less having a universal LLM that is disseminating TTPs worldwide. The technology's there. The question is, can we even use it to leverage against it in a proper cyber defense capability that changes the tactics?
And I'll add one for plus 100 to Rob for one pulling from history, because I think that helps us address it. It actually helps you be a good stoic in the midst of whatever's happening. You can say, themes and rhythms like this have happened before, and we will adapt. And I think he's spot on that actually AI, while right now is currently super empowering attackers, to his point, we could actually have an AI that, again, if you look at what are the TTPs, what do the attack surface looks like, what are abnormal patterns, and having that shared, I'd go even one further, which is, I can remember about 15 years ago, I was pushing for almost a public health approach to cybersecurity, which is in public health, we don't share the specifics, but we share what we're seeing in the different states because each of the 50 different states have their own privacy laws and things like that. And one of the biggest barriers, I think, for sharing insights as to what's happening to one organization with many organizations is, one, they're worried about, am I going to reveal sort of my own vulnerabilities? Am I going to reveal my intellectual property? What might be interesting is there's an approach called federated learning. And federated learning, instead of having the data be shipped somewhere, the algorithm comes and learns there. Imagine actually that we had an algorithm that you were willing to let learn on what your organization is seeing. And as a result, you get the benefits without the specifics or the data as to what other organizations in your industry. So maybe you're all in finance, or maybe you're all in commerce, or maybe you're all in transportation. You could actually say, here are the current attacks as of the last hour that we have been seeing across the world in terms of what might be attack surface activities that are being exploited. And as a result, you do that without having to send your data to anybody, and you're collectively more secure as a result.
Yeah, love that.
So, Rob, thoughts on how incident response and forensics must evolve, especially since AI can navigate breached networks, erase its own tracks, corrupt evidence. So how are the rules have changed, or the technology has changed? So how must incident response and forensics evolve and as a result?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of, got to take a moment because that's a mouthful of an answer that's about to come out of me. So I have to stage this in several different ways. First of all, as David was saying, there's so many different ways that we could potentially utilize the data that needs to be employed. You know, that capability of, potentially be able to do sharing easier needs to be accomplished. And, instant response and threat hunting are now pivoting specifically on what you know and how fast you can know it. So instant response and being able to identify attacks is crucial. So if you're looking for how they're pivoting across the network, how they're potentially doing data media exploitation, essentially looking for, I always go back to the Death Star plans inside a network so they could get it out, or potentially embedding themselves to potentially cause havoc in the future, critical infrastructure, for example, Salt and Volt Typhoon. The hard part here, and taking a step back and looking at its response, is somehow we need to achieve some sort of parity, meaning that as the offensive teams are able to move at increasing velocity, instant response needs to be able to match that. Here's a couple of challenges with that. I believe currently in 2026, and this could be different even 6 months from now, most executives are making decisions whether they're going to RSA and seeing these new solutions that are out there will have a hesitancy by deploying a solution that is going to remove the human in the loop. Offensive teams are going to feel more comfortable removing the human in the loop faster than you as a company that say, I'm going to take on that risk, because if an instant response or detection tool says, hey, I found something, I'm going to block it automatically without a human analyzing that, well, what happens at that situation? If bad things could occur. So are you placing the organization at risk more definitively if you deploy these defensive tools that haven't been tested fully? I would be a little bit concerned right now not having a human saying, yeah, we should block that, turn off that node in order to prevent that attack. Offensive teams are still able to say, well, if it trips over something, not my fault. The cyber defenders can't take that risk. So as a result, we're not going to be able to achieve the same velocity. And that alone is going to create some of the parity issues that even if we match capability to capability, AI versus AI, how do you reduce that risk so we're able to match velocity versus velocity? I don't think we've solved that problem yet technically, because who's going to trust, hey, Rob, how do you know you're not tripping over something that's going to disconnect us from the internet and cause problems? technically we may be able to get there, but how do we know it's going to work effectively? Offensive teams, nah, if it trips over something, and no big deal.
And to Rob's point, I think he underscored a very essential risk calculus, which is one, the defenders want to keep the business running while also keeping it secure, whereas the attackers are like you said, we don't mind. And so because the attackers will be more likely to pull solutions that don't have a human in the loop, we've got to figure out what are ways that can help the defenders move at the same speed. And I think the biggest barrier we have is, despite all this talk about digital twins or whatever, we're really not that mature in terms of enterprises so that you could actually run a really rapid parallel simulation that says, if my security tool opts to do this, what are not just the first order, but the second and third order consequences that could happen to my enterprise? And as a result, I might be trying to secure it, but the next thing I know, I've actually blocked this application and now my customers can't do business. The other thing I would also say, if I was a really sophisticated hacker, I would make it so that you did it to yourself. And as a result, your security team is now dealing with the fact of not only have they actually caused the business to go offline, but now the company is upset at the security team. They're now demoralized. This would be hopefully something that an attacker wouldn't do, but maybe I've seen things in the past where using demoralization is a tactic of certain threat actors.
We have a question or a comment that's come in on exactly this point. And let me just mention that you can ask your questions and you should take advantage of this opportunity. When else will you have the chance to ask Rob Lee or David Bray pretty much whatever you want? So if you're watching on LinkedIn, pop your question into the chat. If you're watching on Twitter, X, use the hashtag CXOTalk. And so on this point, Anthony Scriffignano, who's a very prominent data scientist, he's been a guest on CXOTalk a number of times, he makes the comment that one approach in attacks is for the bad guys to focus on a target that is already distracted in response mode. Yeah. Any thoughts on that, David? You were kind of just talking about.
Well, I'll tee it up and then I'll pass it on to Rob. Is absolutely. I mean, this is exactly what we have seen, not just in cyberspace, but we've also seen in the real world where I get you distracted and focused responding to one activity. Maybe, you've got something that looks like a hardware issue or software issue with your application. And the next thing you know, while you're busy focusing over here, I'm coming in and then going laterally or something like that. So to Anthony's point, what AI, generative AI in particular, now allows attackers to do is to actually plan something that's sophisticated, which did not used to be the domain of most attackers. It was really the domain of nation state actors. And again, it took them months both to do the reconnaissance and the coordination. Now, again, what I'm hoping is that we can actually evolve almost a science where on the defender's side, we can quickly say, I see these isolated events or they appear isolated, but they're actually part of a more coordinated campaign. And I know Anthony Scriffignano has worked countering fraud and actually tackling fraudsters. And usually the challenge is oftentimes you're seeing the tip of the iceberg of what is a much more deeper campaign. And so I think this is exactly why what SANS is doing is so important and why we have to evolve what defenders do, because now with both bots and agents, you could have 5 or 6 fires going on at the same time. And the question is, while those 5 or 6 fires are happening, how do you know there's not a 7th one quietly actually exfiltrating data out of your organization?
Rob, thoughts on this kind of multifocal set of attacks, campaign of attack?
The distraction, and going back to the point of Anthony, the thing that buzzed in my head there, it's not just a distraction, it's just the fact that most teams are exhausted and they're looking at the same screen every single day. And as a result of that, it leans into one of the reasons why defensive agents, could work 24/7 and never get exhausted, will potentially be a game changer. The challenge, though, is we're only seeing offensive teams leverage this against a single target right now. What happens when you start having agent to agents be able to coordinate and communicate with each other simultaneously across critical infrastructure, be able to hit power and water simultaneously? How do you have 2 teams at the same parity level on the defensive side to be able to prevent that? The shock and awe that could occur there, where you could have down to the millisecond execution across multiple different nodes, financial networks, supply chain, with critical infrastructure, electrical, and hit boom, boom, boom. And you imagine what happens on criminal side, ransomware attacks, that they wait until, multiple parts of a supply chain. You think some of the things that happened in the past with ransomware, imagine multiple different hospitals and insurance networks and pharmaceutical hit simultaneously of ransomware attacks. These types of things are definitively possible, and the scale of offensive attacks go larger. When you go back to the distraction, the exhaustion, the limited teams, the workforce that we can't hire a bunch of more people here, the leveraging AI is the only solution. And we come back to that, how do we balance that with what we're seeing the offensive teams, and how many potential attacks will need to occur before the risk calculus is so great that you're going to have to say we have to potentially embed ourselves utilizing some of these new technologies, remove some of the human in the loop, and increase risk as a result of what can happen if we don't. I could go on for minutes and hours about this topic, over a beer, but at the same time, this is possible, and it likely is occurring right now, and it's a matter of time when a geopolitical incident occurs, and they're going to do a show me session of how vulnerable that we all are.
Well,
go ahead, Ann. Go ahead, Michael, and then I'll say something. Go, Michael.
I was going to say, let's talk about autonomous attacks, right? We have OpenClaw, and agents are the new, I don't know, the new refrigerators. Everybody's got to have one, and we're going to have thousands of them. This just makes the entire problem more complex, as Rob just said, right? They don't sleep. So who wants to jump in, and let's talk about that?
So I was going to, go ahead, Rob. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
I was going to just one sentence on that. The good thing about it is OpenClaw and CloudBot, the one thing you hear out of everyone's mouth initially is don't install it on your own system. And it shows people are thinking thoughtfully about turning on autonomous, just go wreak havoc with my own data. And it shows the risk calculus that will happen with security. You need admin access to do anything useful to shut down attacks, but we're already seeing OpenClaw and CloudBot. People say don't install it on your own system with root access because of the fact it could cause havoc. These two things intersect and are not equal on the technological side.
Spot on. And I actually saw there was a story where someone was posting how supposedly they were in Ukraine. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. And they decided to install it on their system because it would make their home smart. Personally, I use, whenever I see the word smart device, smart home, I substitute the word hackable, because that's really what it means when you say a smart device. And I don't know if I would do that in the middle of a active war zone, because that's probably exploitable. So I do think, to Rob's point, one, there are cautions about be very cautious, because these things will possibly wreak havoc. The other challenge is, and this gets to the fundamental challenge of generative AI, which is generative AI is trained on past patterns. And while you can ask it to possibly remix those patterns in interesting ways, it will always be sort of tied to its past training set. It's not necessarily really good at novelty. In fact, when you try to present it with novelty, that's why you sometimes get something that's a pattern that doesn't actually exist, which they call a hallucination. It's just not something it's seen before. And so this is actually more of a challenge on the defender side, because as we train these models to be defenders, we have those 24/7 agents that are helping with defense. The challenge we've got is if a novel attacker really wants to exploit our attack surface, they will gain through various means insights as to what the agents are expecting to see or possibly may see, and therefore come with something completely different, which is why, as what Rob was saying earlier, we've almost got to have like an immune system response that says, I've never seen this type of attack before. I'm going to try and rapidly characterize it. I'm going to try and figure out what the intent is. And then I'm going to percolate the lessons, not just across my enterprise, but ideally through federated learning, I'm going to share those insights with others in my industry, because this is where right now the novelty of the offender attacking offense side is actually puts defenders at a disadvantage, precisely because generative AI is limited to its past training sets.
I have one thing to add to what you just said from a technical perspective, because I had a conversation just yesterday with one of my, James Line actually, chatting about what we're talking about on our RSA keynotes. The attack surface with automated capabilities like CloudBot and OpenCloud, when you end up thinking about it, imagine if you're saying, hey, go read my email. Essentially, you're basically setting yourself up for the ultimate spear phishing, is they'll go click on every single link that's coming in to be able to see what it is. Well, the human at that point is now the security defense because the human can't click as fast as the automated capability here. We've exploded the possibility of just the autonomous capability acting like a human, exposing additional attack surfaces, because if you throw enough balls in the air, one of those is going to be hit by one of these autonomous agents. And it's amazing when you end up thinking about just that alone, increasing speed of you being able to respond to many emails and marketing and tweets and LinkedIn messages. Imagine basically you just throw enough spearfishes at that click capability, one of those is going to land, and it's going to be done at speed. The human actually ends up being, just because they're slow, ends up being a security governor accidentally.
Yeah, and real quick, Michael, just to add on, because I love where Rob's going with this. This points to the very challenge that while we need to use AI to help with our defenders that are already exhausted, that are already over capacity, AI itself is an attack surface itself. We have indications, I wouldn't say confirmation, but indications. Some bad actors have identified when AI as being used for coding, for vibe coding, reliably hallucinates. And they have identified those reliable hallucinations and gone out and written a code library for the very hallucination that the code library has, made it open source. What could be possibly wrong when you actually call a code library that didn't exist until a bad actor wrote it? So this gets to not only do we need to use AI for defense, but as we're using it in the enterprise, it itself is an attack surface, whether we're using it for what we're doing in enterprise or we're using it to write code. If anything, cybersecurity professionals are going to be needed now more than ever. However, we've got to figure out how we up our game and also give them the headspace and breathing room to deal with everything that's happening.
Okay, we have, I want to take one more comment actually from Anthony Scriffignano because it's right on point. And then let's move into questions from a bunch of other people. And you guys who are listening, we need more questions. I mean, why are you not asking questions? I don't get that. You guys are brilliant out there. So let's get, I want to get your brain power, you guys who are listening. You guys are so smart. Okay, so just if you can now expand this aperture into this. Anthony makes the comment, swarms, AI swarms can also learn from how they fail and attack repeatedly in a more targeted way. So thoughts on AI swarms, and then we'll take some questions.
Well, I'll jump on in and then I'll pass it on.
I was going,
please. Your turn first this time. Go.
Oh no. Again, we're all doing jazz here. So I would say swarms. Yes, that gets to the challenge, which is I could inundate your enterprise if I know the capacity of the actual people to respond. And so I've seen swarms before. I've experienced swarms before. And so Anthony is spot on. And like he said, given that they can do permeations and they can try to be adaptive, they only have to be right once out of 1,000 or 10,000 attempts that they're doing. This also points to a lot of historical cybersecurity practices, and I know there's been a shift in the last 5 years, but a lot of historical cybersecurity practices relied on known CVEs, critical vulnerabilities and exploits, and the signature. Well, the challenge is if the swarm is changing its signature every second, that may not appear as a CV. That may not appear as something that a threat device is attacking. So swarms are definitely problematic, and it points to, and I have a sense this is where Anthony's going to the question, we cannot just rely on past trainings. What we need is instead almost an algorithm that says, I see what looks like non-normalcy. It's almost like a second derivative of it, because what we're looking for is, I don't know why I'm seeing this sort of abnormal pattern in my enterprise. It might be hardware or software, but it might be a sign of a swarm is trying to mess with me.
Rob, thoughts on swarms?
I'll pivot a little bit because, I feel we have not seen a specific or very many examples of swarms versus speed. And I flip that a little bit. And when I go back to swarms, the swarm I tend to think about is the swarm of developers that land on a new capability. And I, take a look at what happened with OpenCloud and CloudBot, is that how long ago was this someone's basement project in, weekend development? CoWork is really another good example. From Cloud Code to CoWork being released was 10 days. When you end up having the development lifecycle go from something that used to take years down into weeks, that is the swarm capability I'm looking at, because instead of just one or two developers, you have hundreds of developers potentially iterating on code, or even the code iterating on itself faster than we're able to potentially comprehend. Now, to take that from, hey, there's a positive side to this, is that even though you have capabilities that go from infancy to fully vetted capability within weeks, cyber defenders can leverage the same capability, because offensive teams tend to still be fairly tight held on their capability development, 3-4 developers. What if we flip that and potentially have hundreds, if not thousands, of cyber defenders start working on capabilities for defense, and able to take a Claude bot and make it into a very specific, cruise missile that no one's ever seen before, not just in something that took years to develop, but something that might take weeks and able to be deployed as a counter mechanism inside the networks. So what we're able to see on development speed, we could potentially use on a defensive mechanism for good.
Yeah, actually, real quick, just to double click on what Rob said, this changes the notion of patching. Instead of patching being something that takes months, patching could be done in weeks or even a day.
All right, let's jump to some questions. This is really my favorite part, where we get to hear from the audience and your questions. So keep them coming. All right, so we have a question from Arslan Khan on Twitter X, who says, how should businesses be held accountable, or should they, for cybersecurity issues? So where does the responsibility and the accountability lie?
You want to go first, Rob?
Yeah, Rob, you want to grab that one?
Actually was hoping they would go
Oh,
first.
I'm happy to take it if you
Okay,
want.
David. All right, David.
I'll answer the question, because I'm not going to shy away from it. And here's why. This is hard, because I always go back to my roots in the Air Force on this. Doing instant response correctly still means you messed up. And what I mean by that is the fact that the incident occurred in the first place means that something went wrong. And even though the incident response team may have interdicted it, may have stopped the Death Star plans from being stolen, you don't get medals as an incident responder by saying, hey, good job from stopping that. In the military, you do. Even if an incursion happens, if North Korea flies jets into South Korea, even though they encroached in the airspace, if we're able to launch missiles or something in there to interdict and stop them, everyone gets a medal. That does not happen in cybersecurity. The accountability and what our mentality and our culture is still has not changed to reward proper cyber defense. So accountability incentives are perverse as a result of this. If you're a CISO and you do a good job, you detect the incident happened, you failed. That's the perverse incentives that occur today, and is not going to change because AI is out there. Where's the medals for the incident responders, the SOC teams that detect the incident in the middle of the attack, and then says, hey guys, we stopped it. They did not achieve their operational goals. They're still looked at from a liability, risk, and all this other calculus. You still failed.
David, I could do a hallelujah to what Rob just said, because this is the challenge, is we still have boards and we still have CEOs that think this is a preventative exercise, when the reality is, if you're going to be on the internet, it is going to happen to you. What you want is exactly as Rob said. You want a team that responds to it rapidly, that actually tries to do their best to actually counter it. And actually success is simply, one, we detected it, and two, that we responded to it and we actually did our best to mitigate it. But that is a mind shift take. And I will do anything, by the way, Rob, to help SANS get that message out there, because unless they want to unplug themselves from the internet, bury whatever they're doing underground, and make sure no human being touches it, these things will happen. And they will happen with increasing frequency, partly because of excited geopolitics, but also because of the capabilities that are out there. And if you're going to use AI, what I am trying to do is, when I go to boards and I go to CEOs, I say, like, if you're going to be adopting AI for your enterprise to engage your customers or improve your internal operations, you should, in parallel, upgrade your cybersecurity posture in parallel, because that will actually make it so that you're more responsible in your use of AI, while at the same time, hopefully making it so that you can detect if bad actions are being sent your way, because they will be sent your way.
Yeah. All right, let's jump to another question. And by the way, I have to say, hearing you both talk, I'm ready to hide. I'm ready to, do the ostrich thing. I'll stay home. I don't know, maybe put mattresses up against the windows.
I know someone that can help you get a Faraday cage if you want a Faraday cage. So.
Yeah, but I'll just, like, as a point you just made there, as a parent, do you just like pull your kids in at home and say, hey, never venture outside? You're going to wear a helmet with your bicycle. there's a certain amount of continual risk, no matter what you do, that you
Yes.
have to assume. You can't prevent any bicycle accident from happening. You just set the rules of the road. You say, look both ways, don't run with scissors. There's certain things that are acceptable risk. And unless you have that acceptable risk, there's no learning, there's no growth, there's no acceleration.
But
So, as a parent, you look at it that it's like, oh, I can't prevent all the bad things. But again, no ostrich head in the sand. It's hey, listen, we need to lean forward, especially in today's time, business transformation. Everyone out there is trying to figure out, how do I deal with AI? You just need enough of a parachute, enough of a rope around your waist to say, I could take a certain amount of risk safely, but not without ever potentially falling with zero risk in the chasm.
but it used to be that the risk came from getting hit by a car. Those
Yeah.
risks remain.
Yep.
Only now we have this very large, ongoing, permanent, additional attack surface because we live our lives online.
Correct.
Yeah.
And also because the good news is, so I tell people, if you have a smartphone, you have the capabilities to call anybody a moment's notice, hopefully with their permission, track them or any asset using AirTags or other means anywhere in the world, again, with hopefully their permission, and download satellite footage as recent as 15 minutes ago at 0.25 meter resolution. You have the CIA in your pocket circa the late 1970s, early 1980s, and 2 billion people on the planet have it. So the good news is we've super empowered you to do things that are unprecedented. That also means that bad actors can do things that are unprecedented. I don't think we want to roll that back. It just means, again, we've got to figure out defense in depth. And we've been here before. In the 1910s, 1920s, there was this thing called TNT. TNT was being used by anarchists to do bad things, but we didn't go into lockdown mode. We figured out defense in depth, and now it's less of a threat, and we continue to live our lives. So I think we can figure it out, but it's going to take new approaches. And I think part of the trouble with cybersecurity is both CIOs and CISOs initially reported to chief financial officers, then later chief operating officers. And so it was seen exactly as Rob said, which was cybersecurity was a preventative function as opposed to it is what you do as you're interacting with the world and doing commerce and doing whatever you do. And so what you want to do is have a team that does get the medals for rapidly detecting, rapidly containing, and rapidly mitigating what will happen, because that's the nature of living in the world we're in.
And one
All
more
right.
point to what you just said is that, and I talk about this, with my own kids. You end up taking a look at, we have massive SIM farms that are out there. Imagine that instead of something that someone's hitting your kid or potentially you, your parents, all your neighbors, that kind of scalability is now achievable with AI. So the death by 1,000 cuts argument is actually true. You don't need to steal from ransomware attacks, millions of dollars. All you need to do is hit enough people at 300 a pop, and do that at scale with SIM farms that are being found all across the US. And all of a sudden, the $300 per person times 10,000 equals the same as a single ransomware payout before. This kind of scalability has not been able to be achieved before AI.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, let's go back to some additional questions. And I'm not convinced that the ostrich approach, I still am thinking maybe I need to just simply hide and that's it. Okay. But maybe by the time we're done with this conversation, I'll feel more confident that I can actually go out in the world. All right. This is from Chris Peterson on Twitter X. Oh, and I should also remind you guys that you should subscribe to the CXOTalk newsletter.
Yeah.
Go to CXOTalk.com now, subscribe, and we will send you notices of upcoming shows. And I'll just mention also next week, a week from today, we have as our guest the former director of the CDC, talking about the Centers for Disease Control, talking about medical economics and actually a bunch of issues that are quite similar to this. So join us. Okay, this is from Chris Peterson, and he says, feeding AI tools good data often requires complex tool chains. How do we keep those tools and chains from becoming the attacker's prize targets? Who's going to jump in?
It just,
Rob, go ahead.
You can't. It's the same thing as, UPS delivery walking straight in the door and you're, in UPS, it's the same type of attack surface. Is you can't eliminate. The more you end up having a larger attack surface. In this case, you take a look at what enterprise is now leveraging across, simple Zoom sessions, what we're doing here from Teams and so forth. The likelihood of someone being able to penetrate that is becoming more prescient. I go back to the Chinese and North Korean threat actors that instead of hacking a network, they just get hired as an employee. That's using your own tools in HR, in humans, and plus technical, like you're just send you a laptop that has, the keys to every access point in your network already set. This is going to take individuals to realize that even attack tools, the common management capabilities in our organization are able to be exploited. And the attack surface for a single human, which is really interesting. I was having a separate conversation last night just about this. 10, 20 years ago, or actually 20 years ago, a single individual would have 2, 3 nodes, a phone, a computer, maybe a cable modem. Now you take a look at how many nodes are across my home, your home, 30, 50 nodes, with every single appliance and potential TV. The enterprise network size for a single individual that happened 20 years ago is about the single enterprise size that a single individual has today. It's kind of mind-numbing when you end up saying, count up how many single devices that you individually have that are connected to the internet. Every single one of those is a potential attack surface.
And to
Okay,
build real quick on
sorry, Dave. Sorry,
okay,
David.
go
I
ahead.
have to.
Sure.
I'm just
You
looking
can
at
be
the
the
clock.
moderator. Go ahead.
We have lots of questions that are coming in,
Sure,
and
go
we're
ahead.
just simply going to run out of time. So
Love it.
now I have to call moderator's privilege here. All right.
There you go.
So here is a question from. I am just looking through the list here. Well, Reza Fatahi says there are good opportunities, I'm assuming, for attacks and defense at the application and OS layers. Each angle is a different application. Each layer is a different application. Any thoughts on that? Either of you want to jump into that?
I mean, this is the case, which is to build on what Rob was saying a little bit earlier. You're going to have to find ways to rapidly do independent verification and validation of what you're using as your tools, whether they're for data ingest or applications or things like that. And it has to be faster than what's currently been done. You can't just rely on published critical vulnerabilities. You really need, for the things that are absolutely essential, you almost have to be constantly red teaming how an application or an OS might be used against you. And the good news is, again, AI, I've seen actually instances, I won't name the name of the big tech company, but they did 2 parallel paths. For some of their cybersecurity functions, unfortunately, they initially went down the path of replacing their cybersecurity people with AI, which I do not recommend, do not do, but they tried that. And then in another function for their mobile security, they had the AI focus on known critical vulnerabilities to free up their people, their cybersecurity professionals, to look for new exploits. Well, guess which team outperformed? It was the humans plus the AI that outperformed, because you have to always be looking for new vulnerabilities. You cannot just rely on published known vulnerabilities.
Okay, let's Rob here. You can take the next one. This is from Huwei Wang on LinkedIn, and she says, as a defender and as an attacker for technology readiness, do you see the direction of talent development moving towards what previously was called the 10x engine or a full stack engineer? So the idea of talent and preparing talent to handle these issues.
Well, here's the first thing. I go leadership by vulnerability or vulnerability by leadership, depending on how you want to frame it, is that we're all learning. I'm learning. I had very little knowledge about AI 2 years ago, and I'm struggling on a daily basis. And this is where, from a talent management perspective, there's this idea that we need to hire people with AI experience. It's really hard to assess right now, because by the time you hire them, their knowledge may be already out of date. So from a talent management perspective, one of the things I think is more crucial than ever is trying to identify individuals that have a massive capacity to learn and learn quick. It goes back into the old hacking mindset, and what before it was considered criminal. The original mindset was, I wonder if I put this thing and over here, do this thing, tie the wires together and take a step back. That is a fiddling mindset. And that's what hacking was considered, even going back to the MIT days where they invented the term. That type of talent is hard to come by, and it's also hard to assess. What I'm seeing organizations do, and it's a complete disconnect from, and I credit Kate Marshall on her Substack mentioned this, specifically, you start seeing organizations using hackathons. We ended up seeing, I think it was NVIDIA or Anthropic, just do one. If you end up being the top competitor in this hackathon, not only you're offered a job, you win a cash prize. It is going to assess someone's ability to work through problems, through the problem-solving challenges, to assess their mentality, to be able to show you're the right candidate. That is the only way organizations are going to be able to hire the right people with the massive technological change and the velocity that it's occurring at.
Great. All right. Let's just plow forward into the questions. And you guys who are listening, ask your questions. Like I said before, when else will you be able to ask Rob Lee or David Bray pretty much whatever you want? So take advantage of it. All right. David, this one seems tailor-made for you. And this is from Simone Jo Moore. And earlier you spoke about immune system response, she says. What about the systems that are off? They're compromised or their DNA hasn't developed the signal or detection system for it. What do we do?
Right. So this is where I alluded both with that comment, but also a little bit earlier. You're going to have to instrument your enterprise to have what's called patterns of life. What does normalcy look like for these systems, both in terms of their operations, but also the human use? And so then if a persona that looks like your CFO or your CEO at 9 p.m. on a Friday night suddenly seems to be accessing a finance system that is non-normal, that might be, and again, this gets to Rob's point, which is we have to have ways of defining what is reasonable risk calculus. You may want to stop that transaction until the chief information security officer actually has a conversation and says, was that really you, CEO or CFO, or was that some bad actor trying to exploit your persona to actually pull money out? But that requires enterprises to, one, be using their logs and that instrumentation in a way to establish patterns of life, but there is precedent for this. The other thing I would say real quick, and we haven't gone here, is that the good news is generative AI is really good at passing the Turing test. The bad news is generative AI is really good at passing the Turing test. I get concerned about audio, video, synthetic media being used to convince your humans to do a legitimate activity where nothing was really breached. It was just AI itself was used as a prod to get social engineering on steroids, to have things either money walk out the door, data walk out the door, et cetera. So generative AI itself is going to require us to have better ways of verifying that those workers and those people you're talking to really are legitimate.
All right, let's go to another question. And I'm skipping folks who asked a question already. And if we have time, we'll circle back. Because some of you guys are asking multiple questions, but I want to give everybody a chance. Okay, here's a really interesting one. It's kind of complicated. This is from Dimitris Georgiou, who says, looking into the future, when do you expect that AI agentic defenders will be able to be trusted as an experienced human without a human in the loop? And please answer for both IT and OT environments. Rob, you want to jump on that one?
Trust. And what I mean by that is that when you end up looking at the standard certification, accreditation, and process of human beings, you go to your college degree, you get your certifications, there's assessments that someone ended up going through but again, that's the baseline. You could say they have the minimal qualifications to be able to do this job. But the trust is there's still some third party that is doing this assessment, where I think the industry, and again, for anyone going to RSA in a few weeks, walk around the floor and everyone's going to have this massive solutions, just like you're saying, agentic defenders. Ask how do they establish trust in that capability? Like, well, we have our own rubric. We went through our own battery exam. Here's what we did. Is I could go out there and say, hey, my IQ is X. Well, how do we know that I'm self-assessing my IQ versus having a third-party independent capability to establish that trust? The reason I use trust is all these different accreditation, certification, degree programs, assessments are all aimed to establish trust. Trust in the agentic defenders needs to have some sort of trust mechanism assessed by a third party, not software accreditation, all these other things. Does it handle reasoning equivalent to a third-party human being?
All right, let's go to another question. I love you guys that are asking questions. You are so smart. I love that. All right, this is from Dan Turi. And he says, generally, is industry accepting of integrated logging tools, or is there a need for external immutable logging? It seems like we have rolled out tools without pause to validation and integrity. David, you want to grab that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say it depends on certain enterprises are more instrumented than others. The finance sector, they have to be because they're regulated. I think what he's asking though is it sufficient to have a log where you don't have some immutability to it or not? And I would say, yes, you want to have immutability to the log because as we know, some of these attackers, one of the things they'll do is they'll mess with the log or even destroy the log. And so the short answer is yes on immutability. I do want to actually add to this question and tie it to what Rob also was saying, though. I think we're going to find, especially for agentic AI, and I realize there's several companies plowing ahead with it. If something has a filter or a safety applied after compute, so post compute, I get very nervous about post compute agentic AI ever being 100% safe. And again, you can figure out contexts where it's acceptable to have that risk. I want to have more and more AI agents where I can have filters, boundaries, rules applied pre-compute, because I think the moment you let the machine compute something, just the nature of a hacker, an attacker, is they will get it to do something you don't want it to do. So I think what I would encourage increasingly is look for people that are pushing solutions that are pre-compute versus post-compute. That's a nuance that unless you're a computer scientist, it's not something people ask for. But I think this is the geek in me just saying pre-compute is where we need to put more attention to.
All right, let's go on to another question. Keep your questions coming. We have a little bit of time left, and I will also invite whoever's listening, connect with me, and I'm sure on LinkedIn, and I'm sure David and Rob probably feel the same way. So
just say not a bot and pineapple so that we can actually verify you're real.
Right, exactly. Say not a bot and pineapple, and connect with us on LinkedIn, because if you're watching, and especially if you're asking questions, you are part of our community, and we love you. And that's awesome. All right. Let's see here. We have a question from Christopher Jablonski. And Rob, I think this one is good for you. It's perfect for you. I'll only ask you, I'll read the question in a second, but Rob, to start answering relatively quickly, because we're just going to run out of time.
100%.
And this is from Christopher Jablonski. He says, going back to how offensive teams seem to have a permanent competitive advantage as they are more comfortable with removing a human in the loop, by how much does this issue and other such asymmetries delay autonomous security from reaching reality? And he's polite. He says thank you too.
I think that's a reality for the near term. And I actually think to a certain extent it is necessary, because I think from a cyber defender's perspective and development in the industry, we've become a little bit assumption that we have some sort of parity that we're able to, block and tackle what the offensive teams have been able to do for the past 5 to 6 years. Now, this is going to create some leverage in the industry and hopefully a lot of innovation that will be able to match it. We're assuming that we're going to be able to leverage AI to AI. I go back into what the offensive teams aren't going to be able to do is create AI ecosystems that are going to be able to have defenders talk to one another. You even just take a look at CloudBot and some of the capabilities it's already been able to leverage. AI judicial systems for different agents, what it's doing, ability for AI agents to ask humans to do certain tasks. And again, that physical level task, you could have an AI agent who's your manager tell David, hey, I need you to go and over to this system and unplug it from the wall, even though that seems, rash. But again, there's ransomware cases that is literally what the response mechanism is to make sure that system is not infected. There are ways for innovation that are unexplored on the cyber defender side that this disparity, this asymmetry that's occurring is going to force. And I'm excited to see how this develops.
All right. And Michael M. throws a monkey wrench into all of this.
Okay.
Okay. Michael M. says, sure, all of this is true, but once you remove the human in the loop, AI errors are a greater problem, and the bad guys simply have to hack the AI defender and convert it into a dual agent.
Yeah, so that is spot on. I would say, again, it depends. We haven't dived into the different types of AI. There are AI methods that are more rigorous than, say, generative AI. But I will give the analogy, and I think Rob's right, that in the short term, the advantage is on the offensive side. Defensive has up this game. But we do have U.S. naval vessels where if the captain of the ship flips the switch, there is no human in the loop. if something's coming at that ship and it's threatening the ship, the system will actually be fully autonomous in defending the ship. Now, he obviously turns off that switch when he's not in a danger zone. He's not doing it in a home port. But that is a autonomous and AI of a different name. It's not generative AI that does successfully defend the ship. So I think what we need to get to is through a combination of more rigorous AI that's less brittle than generative AI, but also formal methods and other means like that. We can get something like that where if you decide you're now under siege, you want to flip the switch, then the autonomous defenses can go on. But right now, as we've already observed, we don't have enough knowledge of the second and third and fourth order effects in an enterprise that it wouldn't be used against us.
Can I
Okay.
answer the monkey wrench?
Yes, yes, please, please.
All right, really short. You're right. I believe on the defensive side, human in the loop is going to be there. And when it's not, there are two things that are simultaneously going to happen. You're going to be able to board a plane, look up in the cockpit, and there's not going to be a pilot there. If you're comfortable with that, you're comfortable with cyber defense having no human in the loop. Second side to that, you go into the doctor, it says, hey, you need a surgery, and you have the humanoid robot come in with the scalpel and ready to sedate you. Are you totally comfortable with that? When these two things happen near the same time, I believe human in the loop will be removed from cyber defense. We have some years to be able to get there.
Spot on. Yes.
Okay, I go back to what I said earlier. I'm going back to hiding once again. Because that seems like the most prudent response to all of this.
Well,
all
have
right.
you gotten into a Waymo yet without a driver?
You know, I live in Boston, and no, I have never used a Waymo without a driver.
Right.
Well, and I think even real quick on the Waymo example, let's say Waymo's got everything working in the AI. We saw when the power went out, they stopped, and that was not a cyber attack. It's just the power went out. I've also seen where there are foreign jammers and that can basically squelch any comms, any geolocation within a 3-kilometer radius. So yeah, the reality is the world is interconnected, but this is why it's important to have folks on the defender side.
Well, then, given all of that, I'm glad I'm wearing a turtleneck because I can just totally pull it.
Well, we already gave our biometrics by doing this video, but anyway.
Okay. Let's very quickly go to another question. This is from Hader Souza, who says, okay, here's another monkey wrench. One of the current AI challenges is that there is no way to distinguish when AI provides the correct information or hallucinates. How can we boost the trust of the information provided? And also what role governments or entities should take? And let me split this up. And Rob, maybe you can talk about the issue of boosting trust in the information coming from AI systems. And David, very quickly, you can talk about the role of governments and official entities in this.
From a trust perspective, how do you trust it not going to do, hallucinations or anything else? Do you trust a human? I mean, you employ someone, how do you know they're going to be 100% perfect in their answers? How do you know they're not going to read something and interpret it incorrectly? When you end up looking at prompt injection, it's no different than information warfare campaigns from, Russia saying, hey, we have this massive groundswell of, feeling on this one topic. And then everyone believes that, and that becomes the truth. How do you prevent humans from doing it? Is the same answer. How do you prevent agents from doing it? We have to start looking at these technologies as reasoning. They're able to be, convinced of bad data. They're able to potentially interpret things incorrectly. If you're not able to trust humans, and we have them employed everywhere, including in critical infrastructure, flying planes, going back to that example, and even bad data coming in there has resulted in bad things happening, there's very little trust that you're going to be able to ever assume in the system that every single if-then loop, 1 + 1 always equals 2. With AI and agents, 1 + 1 is going to equal 3 in many cases, just like it happens for humans. Mistakes will happen, and we're not going to be able to get around it.
And if I can just say spot on to what Rob said, I often say I define trust as the willingness to be vulnerable to the actions of an actor you cannot directly control. That could be a human, that could be an organization, that could be an AI. And what it shows is if you perceive competence, perceive benevolence, and perceive integrity, you're willing to trust. Well, the reality is, as Rob was saying, foreign actors can manipulate those perceptions so that you either do trust something you shouldn't or vice versa. But these are true for humans as well. So we should be approaching it the same way we want to hold organizations and humans recognizing that they will make mistakes, but accountable if they make a mistake that actually results in harm or loss of life. I don't think you can have government regulate what is good information. That is a slippery slope to really bad things happening. I will give a shout out to Ellen McCarthy's Trust in Media Cooperative, which is trying to give people the tools to do this themselves or in communities. And then the last thing I will say, because I'll throw another monkey wrench into this, I have seen already that generative AI is really good at building psychological profiles of each of us, thanks to our digital exhaust, and figuring out if I present this information to David or Michael at this right time, I'm going to possibly get them to take a following action. That's not a cybersecurity risk. That's just a collective free society risk, which is we need to recognize that if we get our emotions up, if we get angry or we get fearful, is that a case where maybe a AI agent is trying to deliver information to mess with our emotions and get us to do a behavior? And that's where I tell people, always take a breath if all of a sudden you feel like your adrenaline just went skyrocketed.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. We've basically got machine mediated social engineering to a very fine degree. And remember, when you type your information into an LLM, there's no HIPAA protections, you have no legal protections. You're giving that information away. And yes, I understand the terms of service, they don't always use their models to train, but if somebody issues a subpoena, your information is coming out. All right, very quickly, Rob, this is from David Batts. What factors should be evaluated to determine the need for a third-party AI risk assessment? Really quickly, please.
Almost 100%. When are you not going to be able, are you going to hire someone with no assessment of their skills, capabilities, knowledge? It's going to be 100% across the board. We're going to need to figure out some sort of trust assessment capabilities for AI. Right now, it's a chatbot. We kind of think of it as Google. Once we start letting autonomous decision-making occur in your home, yeah, this is where you're definitely going to want to say, who assessed that thing to be able to make a decision, even on like lower threat things that are occurring in the household. It's going to come down to it's going to need to exist somehow. You're going to want to know, how does this thing know its skills, know its actions, and it's going to reason properly.
All right, very, very quickly, whoever wants to take this, Reza Fatahi comes back with a very quick question. He says, what are acceptable latencies for a defense infrastructure or decision or deliberative process, and for key decisions or deliberative process in terms of APIs? Do either of you happen to know that?
There's no magic number, but I think what it's showing is what Rob has been emphasizing is we do need to up our game on the defender side. And I think it's about identifying, one, is this something suspicious, but I don't think we're under siege. Are we now under siege? And then we need to increase our op tempo. I don't think you can necessarily give a specific latency number for the enterprise, but it does say you should be able to rapidly respond and mitigate what you perceive to be attacks at a much faster rate than you have. And that's going to require new playbooks, which is why I'm excited about the innovations that will happen on the defender side in the years ahead.
All right. And I have a final question for each of you. Rob, what does a security culture look like in practice, especially given AI and autonomous systems and all the things that we've discussed?
I don't think it's any different from any other career field that's out there. Everyone is running around with a lot of angst, staring at AI. Is this going to replace my job? What new skills am I going to need to be able to maintain in the future? The security culture is led by the managers. If the managers are not, really emphasizing that AI is going to have a positive impact on you, your career, and the business, then that's where the security cultural vulnerability actually exists. Has to be led. They have to be deliberate, and they have to show that you're not at risk from learning AI and looking at AIs to increase efficiencies in your organization. Otherwise, you're putting the organization at risk based off the offensive capabilities that exist today.
All right. And David, looks like you're going to get the last word here. Organizations are building critical systems on data they can't fully verify and very often don't fully understand. what should boards of directors do, and should boards treat data provenance as a fiduciary responsibility? David, and very quickly, please.
Yeah, real quick is, of course. And I think, though, I want to, again, double click on what Rob said, which is boards, most importantly, even before they tackle data provenance, should be saying, what type of culture are we creating for our cybersecurity professionals? If it's a shame and blame, if it's like, how dare this ever happened, then I guarantee you your company is not going to exist in 3 or 4 years, probably. If, however, it's the idea that this is part of doing business, we want folks that are learning, we want folks that are adapting, that include data provenance, but also how many people verify that the hardware chips really are what the hardware chips they are? That's a geopolitical reality too. That's not something that the board has to get into the sort of the knickers of cybersecurity professionals to do, but they should be saying, what are we doing to learn and adapt and actually have the ethos that we have a culture that says it's about rapid detection, rapid mitigation of data issues, hardware issues, or cybersecurity issues.
All right. And with that, we're out of time. I mean, this conversation could go on, and I hope you will both come back and join CXOTalk again so we can dive more deeply into these issues, because we barely scratched the surface today.
Oh, I want to do it with Rob over a beer, so maybe next time in person.
Definitely. So. Well, we're going to ostrich ourselves first and then have the beer underground. Then we'll feel a lot more comfortable.
All that sounds good. A huge thank you to Rob T. Lee. He is Chief AI Officer of the SANS Institute, and to David Bray, who is Chair of the Accelerator at the Stimson Center. Gentlemen, thank you so much. And a huge thank you to everybody who watched. Before you go, again, subscribe to the CXOTalk newsletter. We'll send you updates. You are now part of our community, and we want you. Join us, and we have great shows, amazing shows, actually. And we'll see you again next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.